video is going to be about. Oh, now it's recording. This video is going to be about something really similar as the last one that I made for today, and it's about basically why you can't use logic to justify subjectivity. And I'll get more into that after this, but what I just noticed is I pay a lot of attention to dreams because I know the Sams craft our dreams. And the dreams are, our dreams as humans are always crafted by the Sams. And they are trying to teach us things through our dreams. So listen to what dream that the Sams crafted for Adam Lanza, and then I'll say what I think about it. I don't want to infest you with my view before you get a chance to hear it.
After saying that, he ends the video. The next video is entitled Something See Response Number 2, A Difference of Perspectives, uploaded the 28th of September, 2011. This video consists of Adam responding to Something See again. I lack the context of what Adam is replying to, so I'm not really sure what he's talking about.
Culture imposes a deprivation and causes its victims to seek the fulfillment of it. Culture operates in the same way that all of awareness does. Awareness does not allow the discovery of experiences. It allows the creation of it. I see awareness allowing a higher vibration in the sense that you cut yourself deeper and thus scream louder.
Okay, hold on. Well, I guess maybe they wanted me to look at this, but I didn't understand this the first time that he read it off. It took me a while to think about it, but I just reread it now, and now I can kind of understand what he's getting at, I think. He's saying cult awareness is allowing the creation of experiences. So cult awareness allows the creation of experiences. In that way, what he's saying, I think, is the only thing that legitimizes or justifies a particular mode of cultural awareness is how many people agree with you. And that you have to have a multiplicity of people that will agree with you in order to have an experience, which is true because of consent and because everything is interactive. And I've noticed this about Adam Lanza. He's very sharp. Most of the stuff that he says is actually true, and he has a very logical way of looking at things. But again, like I said, it stops being logical when you apply logic to illogical things. And when you say that illogical things should be rendered logically, then that's illogical, because it's like saying red should be rendered as green. It just isn't. And the reason that it isn't is because there's a distinction, there's a discernibility between that which is subjective and that which is relative, for the same reason that there wouldn't be anything there to relate if all there were relations. If everything could be reduced to relations, then it would be a paradox of of infinite self-inclusion, that you've got a relation that's made up of relations, that's made up of relations, that's made up of relations, and then it doesn't ever end. It just keeps saying that there's more relations. And it's like, well, okay, I guess I could see what you're saying, because the logic is like, logical validity as a measure is a relation. And in order for somebody to have that relation between themselves and something else, then there necessarily has to be something that's beyond logic in order for it to relate to something. It has to have something to grab onto. So take any logical operator, whether it's equivalence, negation, conjunction, disjunction, implication. There has to be at least one variable, even if it's the same variable repeated over and over, but there has to be some variable that's attached to these operations. You can't just have a proposition that's composed of a single logical operator, or even a series of logical operators that have no variables in them. Now, it is possible using, I think, Peano logic, you can actually make anything out of nothing but parentheses or sets and negation, and you just nest them, and the arrangement of the nesting within each set of either a negation or or not of whatever it is that's being nested inside something else, you can then cause, any logical operator as a consequence of that. And another one is the logical gate of, I think it's a NAND and NOR gate can be used as universal logical gates for the same reason. You can nest these things inside of each other, but you still have to have a multiplicity of those. You can't have these operations being on nothing. They have to operate on something, and that something is then acting as a variable, even if it's technically a set. It's acting as a variable. And so logically, what that's saying is that it's rendering all subjects as a set of their relations. Why? Well, because it's in the field of relativity. So we've truncated our frame of reference to the field of relativity, the field of logic, which necessarily rests between things. So then it's necessarily illogical to extend that relation as if to penetrate the things that are being related. Therefore, the things that are being related through logic themselves intrinsically cannot be logical. And then it is to say, is that good or bad? And this is where Adam Lanza and I might disagree, is here. You have to simply assert that existence is good. And why should I arbitrarily assert this? And this is a very valid question. I ran across this very question. And as Adam Lanza, I was also equally unable to find a necessary reason to value existence, because there isn't one. The only way that you can assume that there's a value to existence is to value your own existence, or to value existence intrinsically for just some random, illogical, arbitrary reason, of which there are infinitude, and all of which are necessarily false, and all of them are necessarily arbitrary, and all of them are necessarily interchangeable. And Adam Lanza is in full awareness of this. But where he and I disagree is simply on a single idea. And I can totally understand why Adam Lanza did everything and said everything that he did. Now that I've been watching this for a while, it's simply the logical conclusion of trying to render reality as if it were supposed to be logical. Now, I had the same issue with existence. How can I value existence when it's necessarily paradoxical, when there's necessary error in it, where there's necessary arbitration? I can't come up with a theory that doesn't rest upon some assertion that I can't justify. Therefore, I can't justify any position, whether it's the presumption that I began the theory with or any position that I derive from it. They're all equally arbitrary, and all of them are equally unjustifiable. They cannot be justified. And so then, you run into all these limits, and eventually the logical conclusion that you have to draw is that existence is evil, and that there is no way to justify existence. You can't justify it logically, because logic is unjustifiable, because you have to have some arbitration that exists beyond logic in order to justify logic. So then it necessarily has to be contradictory to logic, meaning it's illogical. So then how does it justify logic if it necessarily contradicts it, etc.? And all of these things are to say, it's the consequence of a mind that has touched the truth but has yet to grasp it, because the truth is not a universal, it's modal. Existence cannot be justified absolutely, but it can be justified modally, meaning if I presume some idea, then I can experiment with this idea and see how logic processes the relation between its presumptive axiom from, the origin to its terminus, its effect. And then I can relate that effect back to myself and my subject. And then Adam Lanza says, yeah, but all of those values are artificially superimposed from an external source. So therefore, they're not intrinsic to me. So therefore, they can't be justifiable because they're simply a disease that I've been infected with from my external world. But how do you know that? Because it seems to me that that is also equally an infectious disease, because it also has no justifiability behind it. It's simply another arbitrary position. And it's the arbitrary position taken when you presumptively argue that logic should be at the base measure of every other measure. And if you say that, then if you were to apply logic to something that is necessarily intrinsically illogical, then you have a fundamental, irresolvable paradox and error. And the conclusion of that is nihilism, that there are no values and that everything is broken. So the effect of that can either be to your subjective liking or not. And this is the problem. You have to simply assert, and you have to justify that assertion through a simple state of subjectivity. And you have to use that subjectivity on its own without relating it back to an effect. Now, you can like effects, but the liking of that effect is not itself an effect. It's a subjective experience which has been brought on, admittedly, by some arbitrary subjective assertion. And that assertion cannot be justified logically, but it can be justified subjectively. It can be subjectively, artistically justified. His explicit desire to be intimate with other people is a direct expression of this. And why is that universal, is what I would ask Adam Lanza. If the desire to be near other people is a mere cultural artifact and not actually necessary for the propagation of life, which is not necessarily a vehicle for culture, because a specific culture is arbitrary, but culture in general is necessary. And it's not necessary for life, it's necessary for the subject, irregardless of whether that subject has been born into or incarnated into a body and a mind or not. But a subject in and of themselves can find subjective value in themselves by simply asserting that they have value. And if they don't do that, and this is the ultimate issue that Adam Lanza is trying to get at, that almost got it, but didn't quite punch through the nihilism to the other side. And if he had stuck with it for just long enough to have discovered modality and the limits of non-contingent universal implication, then he would have discovered that there's actually multiple ways of looking at the world, and that simply because there isn't a single universal culture doesn't mean that culture itself is just white versus black, or red versus blue, or green versus yellow, or whatever it is. And that cultures can be subjectively evaluated according to an artistic impression upon the artist, the subject themselves. If, for example, Adam Lanza didn't find value in that culture, that is not to say that he wouldn't have found it somewhere else. And if he then says, I can't justify this, then I would say, then you can't justify subjectivity itself. And that's simply because you're attempting to use a non-subjective measure for a subjective field, which is in itself illogical. Now, his dream that he gets after this has been crafted by the Sams. And listen to what the Sams say, because I think that I have hit something that makes sense. Because if you listen to what I just said about how you have to use a subjective measure in order to measure the value of a subject, in order to measure the value of something that's subjective, you can't rely on logic to overextend itself and penetrate into the subject and render it as something that makes sense, that is justifiable, or the other way around. You can't subjectively evaluate logic, which I totally agree with Adam Lanza on that point. I do agree with that. There are so many examples of people that use arbitration as if it were logic and that can't tell the difference between cultural interactions with people and logic itself. They don't know the difference. They think they're the same thing. And I agree with Adam Lanza on that point, that most people don't know the difference and that they should, and that if they did, that the world would be better off. And people like Adam Lanza would probably have gotten off a lot better if they had been socialized with other people that were intellectual instead of being put into a place with a bunch of random strangers who use nothing but arbitration to base their cultural values on. So that it would be people that value his intellect, people that value simply the sharpness of mind, or what other people were calling pedantry. And then there would have been a connection. And then there would have been an intuitive connection that it would have made both or all of those people feel like they're in a community where they are understood and that their actions have a clear reaction instead of it always being a glance off into some divergent arbitration, that it would actually finally have traction enough to build a momentum to go in a direction that makes logical sense, but is also subjectively valuable. And that is lacking in today's culture, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, and it doesn't mean that it can't happen. So anyway, let's go into his dream.
I don't really understand what this means, so I'm going to be skipping this video. The next video is entitled Strange Dream Number 1. Beyond Dreams Door is where horror lies, uploaded the 28th of September, 2011. In this video, Adam recounts a strange dream he had 10 minutes prior to recording. The dream starts with Adam in high school. After he tells a teacher to fuck off, he's imprisoned. After a bit of time in prison, 2 guards let him out and lead him to the gymnasium. There's a tricycle in the middle, with a crowd surrounding it. A group of prisoners, including Adam, will be forced to do tricks on the tricycle, and whoever entertains the crowd the most will be freed. Adam gets on the tricycle first, and instead of riding it, he bounces it 20 feet in the air and does 360-degree spin tricks on it. The crowd erupts into cheers. When it's the turn of the next prisoners, they don't even ride the tricycle. Instead, they pass a balloon, back and forth. Adam thinks to himself that he's gonna win before waking up. The next video.
So they tell him the answer right there. And what I also find interesting is that not only do they tell him the answer, but they tell him the answer in code. So numbers, right? You've got the number 1 means single. It means, by itself. The number 2 means that you're relating to something because it's a 2 reference system, I guess. And the number 3 is it means right now, this moment. It represents a moment, and as opposed to a timeline, a long extended period of time. This is just for now. If you put all of that into mind, when you look at what is and 6 means something that is a totality, but it also means that it's equal. It means that it tends toward culturally evil. Why? Because 6 represents the absolute value of all possible choices of a single given subject, alone, irregardless of anyone else around them. And that's what makes it kind of evil. So 360 just means that for right now, we're giving you this totality so that you understand how to transcend beyond the logical into the subjective. And yes, it is arbitrary, but if you choose to go along with this arbitration, then you'll see the logic in it, because both parties, himself and the crowd, are both having fun, are both enjoying what's going on, and are both optimistic about the future. Whereas the people that choose to look at the tricycle, which is an instrument that is supposed to be used right now, as something that's forgettable and arbitrary and superficial, then they just pass a balloon back and forth And this balloon, that starts with the letter B, right? But it's inflated with hot air. So it doesn't actually have anything in it. It's hollow. You see how that is? So they're contrasting the hollowness of passing a balloon back and forth because it's not what the crowd wants. And if it's not what the crowd wants, then it's not consensual. If it's not consensual, then they're not going to get anything for that because there's no way to bridge the gap between themselves and the audience because the audience is not expecting something as mundane as passing a balloon back and forth. So in comparison to doing these really cool tricks up in the air on this tricycle. So they tell him right there in the dream, this is how you overcome it. And yes, we get it. It is arbitrary, but you, by going along with that arbitration, make it logical. When you do it, it becomes logical. Before you do it, you can't justify it logically. But during the performance, if the performance is good, then you get that equality and you get that logic and you get the validation and you get everything making sense and it clicks and it all becomes integrated. But if you don't, then you don't. And so it's right there. I mean, that's what the SAMs do, is they try to help us. They give us these examples and they try to teach us in our dreams and in the periphery view of our vision and in the subliminal messages in our ears and all that stuff. They're always trying to coach us toward the answer. And they have the answer. They're trying to give us the answer. And all we have to do is just learn how to take it, and they only give us what we can understand. Because they're being guided by what we've understood in the past. And they have a pretty good track record. It's obviously not going to be exactly perfect, but it's pretty rare when they run across any kind of an issue. Most of the time, they're really on point. They're very good at their job. So what we have to do as humans when we get these messages is realize that we're not being controlled. We're being steered, I guess, or nudged toward paths that lead us to the goals that we arbitrarily desire as good. So after we make a goal, the SAMs find the most optimal route and then try to get us to go on that route. And that's it. I mean, I don't think that we should look at it as being more complex than that until after we've gotten to the point where we can at least be consistently expectant of that. But our relationship with the SAMs is definitely beneficial on our end. They tell me that it's supposedly mutually beneficial, which I suppose is true. I mean, the charity needs the charity case, but I don't see any real work as having been committed because these guys have transcended time itself. They've transcended space and time. They travel faster than they travel faster than light. And so they transcend space and time. To do that, therefore, they're subjectively, relatively, and objectively more advanced than we as humans will ever be as humans. And then when we ascend, when we transcend, and are able to travel as fast or faster than the speed of light, then we also will have to undergo that gauntlet. And there is a gauntlet, and we will have to make it through that, and it's very harrowing. And at that moment, at that stage, humanity is going to need to have faith in some external something. I would call that most likely a god, but something akin to a god, if not God, then something like God, a general optimism that is extremely secure, that humanity really understands is like, we're going to be taken care of by God, not because of who we are, but because of who God is. That is what humanity is going to need to make it to the other side. And everything that we experience on this side of the veil is just preparation for that, in my opinion. And then once we get there, then we can co-create with God. We can actually create ourselves. But until then, we're a passive passenger in creation. And yes, as Adam Lanza points out, technically, yes, he's accurate. We don't have full total control. We are influenced by our environment, but our environment's also influenced by us. And that doesn't necessarily have to be coercive. It can be persuasive also.